I say third grade explanation because this is the sort of arm-waving explanation that I researched and did understand as a third grader. So here it is, my attempt at explaining cosmology and the Big Bang in terms that even a creationist can understand. I'm resigned to failure. So now to understand the Big Bang and why it works, you first have to understand the nature of atoms, matter, and energy. Atoms are composed of three elementary particles: electrons, protons, and neutrons. The protons and neutrons reside in the core, while the electrons fly around in clouds that are precisely defined by the laws of quantum mechanics. The vast quantity of the atom's volume is accounted for by these electron clouds. Now normally these electrons are held away from the nucleus by their electron shell pressure. However, if enough force is exerted upon the electron clouds, say by a combination of gravity and the electromagnetic force, the electron clouds will collapse. The electrons fall into the nucleus, and the protons and electrons will combine into neutrons. This is the exact action that happens to create a neutron star. Now the neutrons themselves are made of even more basic elementary particles, particularly quarks. When themselves under a great deal of pressure, neutrons are held apart by the strong force, but even the strong force can be overcome, say in the collapse of a supernova into a black hole. Now it becomes necessary to deviate into another branch of physics, relativity. I'm not going to go into depth on relativity. All you need to know is that E equals mc squared, that so over-referenced equation. What this equation tells us is that matter and energy are, in fact, one and the same. The only notable difference being that matter has volume. Let me repeat that to get the point across. Energy and matter are the same thing. That means that energy displays all of the properties of matter, including, as it turns out, gravity. And if something has gravity, that means it also has mass. Yes, energy weighs something. Granted, we can't directly observe it here on Earth, because it takes an awful lot of energy just to get a little gravity. Now we can get back to the main point. If neutrons themselves are put under enough pressure, they collapse and revert to pure energy. The energy doesn't take up space and is not attached to any matter. It's just free existing energy because it does not take up any space. You get a singularity, a single point in space with no volume. Though in extreme cases it can actually be a ring, but I won't bore you with the unnecessary black hole physics. I know I took a roundabout method of explaining how a singularity is a high mass point of energy, but I'm hoping that makes it easier to understand the logical basis of where they come from. It was once thought that such a singularity was inescapable, and that any matter that fell into it was stuck forever. But then Stephen Hawking demonstrated that if said singularity is spinning, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle comes into play. Virtual particles are created and matter bleeds away from the singularity. So we get into yet another branch of physics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Long story short, it is a strange contortion of conservation of matter that explains how virtual particles can be formed outside and around a singularity and lead to real particles leaving the singularity. Now I'm not going to deep into the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, as most of it doesn't even deal with singularities, but it is one proposed method of how a singularity can explode. It has been proven that matter can bleed off of a singularity, but it is proposed that if a great deal of virtual particles were created at once, as is quite possible around a very high mass singularity, which is also spinning very fast, it could lead to the effective explosion of said singularity. Now I know that the immediate creationist argument that's going to come to mind at such a proposition as this is, what are the chances that a bunch of random particles come into existence around a singularity causing it to explode? And truth be told, the chances are exceptionally small. Yet you have a singularity which has existed for a preposterously long amount of time. This singularity, yes, the chance of exploding during any one moment is next to nothing. But when you have an almost infinite number of moments, it becomes an almost guaranteed occurrence. I know any creationist that hears this will have a field day, but the Big Bang Theory does not purport to explain where this singularity came from, though it is widely believed that the singularity simply existed with no definite beginning. There are reasons for this, but they all deal with relativity and the hyperbolic nature of space-time. Now, any sane individual should be asking, there is your theory, but where is the evidence to back it up? So, we'll start with Hubble, who the Hubble Space Telescope was named after. He noticed through his telescope that the universe was expanding. All of the other galaxies not in our local cluster, such as the Andromeda Galaxy, were moving away. He was able to do this because of the severe redshift in these galaxies. He in fact noticed that the farther away a galaxy was, the faster it was moving away because it had a more severe redshift. He concluded that everything has to be expanding, as nothing was getting closer, and farther away objects were moving away at a greater rate. He took this line of thought to its logical conclusion and said, well, if everything is moving away from everything else, then it all must have been together at some point. And if it was all together at some point, what could have caused it to all leave? Maybe a big catastrophic explosion. To which he asked himself, like any good scientist, what indicators would we see if there was an explosion that caused the start of the universe? After running some calculations about the heat and energy required in such an explosion, based on the known mass of the universe, he said to himself, there would be an awful lot of microwaves floating around in the cosmos as a result of black-body radiation remnant of this explosion. And lo, what to his wondering eyes did appear? Sorry, I always wanted to say that. But an engineer from Bell, who said to himself, oh dear, okay, enough with the rhyming. There appeared to be a great deal of interference in the Bell engineer's radio antenna. So he published his findings, because his experiment failed. Now, all Hubble had to do was take a look at those findings, notice that the interference was splat in the middle of the radio band, what we call microwave, and he was able to say to himself, damn, looks like maybe there is some proof for this Big Bang theory of mine. Okay, now we have our proof that a big explosion isn't so crazy. Well, but what about this singularity nonsense? Doesn't that sound like something that I'm pulling out of my ass? Well, fortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it is not. There is one other kind of well-known singularity, a black hole. It logically follows that if black holes actually exist, then the idea of a supermassive singularity at the beginning of the universe isn't so far-fetched as many creationists would have us claim. The existence of black holes was purported based on known physics theories many years in advance of actually finding them, by the likes of such people as Einstein. However, it would have seemed impossible to find black holes because according to their very definition, they emit no radiation whatsoever. Fortunately, the matter falling into them does. As matter falls closer to the hole, it gains kinetic energy, and the more energy an object has, the higher frequency radiation will emit as black-body radiation. Black holes are so massive that if they do exist, any matter falling into them will emit X-rays in huge quantities. So when the technology was finally available to reliably look at interstellar X-rays, someone pointed one at the sky, and sure enough, X-rays, in the exact pattern they would emit spiraling into a singularity. Furthermore, several binary systems have seemingly empty spaces that their stars are in tandem orbit around. Though these areas always seem to be siphoning matter off of the star, and that matter can be observed to be emitting X-rays, clear evidence that such singularities as black holes do exist. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The idea of the Big Bang is everything coming from a singularity, and why that is not in fact ridiculous. I'd like to extrapolate on the ideas presented here in later videos, such as the hyperbolic curve of space-time and why it is relevant to the Big Bang. The often heard but rarely explained quote of, "It was an explosion of space-time, not an explosion of matter." And nebular theory is a basis for the foundation of the solar system, and why a singularity suddenly exploding does not in fact imply the idea of some divine creator pressing the explode button. I encourage you to go to the links that I've posted in the sidebar as sources, as they contain some fairly useful information, and have a nice day.